Okay, we're just going to have a short review for the Unit 4 test. Most of these things you should have studied already, so hopefully this will just be a review for you. But if you don't remember some things that we go over here, just go back into your lessons and do a little bit of reading on them to make sure that you feel pretty secure in your information that you have for the test. Okay, we want to study the adrenal glands. Here you can see in the brown we have the kidneys. Those aren't the adrenal glands. That's the part of the body that produces the urine, kind of like a filtering system for the blood. And you can see these tubes that go down here. Let me move that back up. These tubes go down here, so the urine that's produced up here actually flows down through the ureters, that's what those called, into the bladder, and then out the urethra. So these little glands on the top are little triangular shaped glands. They, amazingly enough, do quite a few important things. You wouldn't think, but they do. And they produce a lot of hormones, such as cortisol, the androgen hormones, aldosterone, and adrenaline. Now the cortisol, we just want to briefly go through what some of the things are that they do. Kind of helps the body, helps control the body's use of things like carbohydrates, proteins, fats. Another important job that it has is to suppress inflammatory reactions in the body. Like maybe you get a splinter in your hand, you get that inflammatory reaction, the redness, the warmth. It kind of helps to suppress that. So androgen hormones, these are the hormones that are actually converted. They're made here, but they're converted elsewhere in the body then to female hormones, which would be the estrogens, and the male hormones, which we would call the androgens. Now, even though they do produce some of the precursors for those hormones, most of those sex hormones, like estrogen, are produced in the ovaries, and most of the androgens are produced in the testes. But these little adrenal glands do some of the precursors too. Now, aldosterone is very important in maintaining the level of sodium and potassium in the body. That's important because it helps maintain blood volume, blood pressure. So that's a very important, obviously important hormone there. You don't want your blood pressure to get too low, otherwise you would probably pass out. Adrenaline is that hormone that's involved with the fight or flight syndrome, where if your body gets into a stressful situation, your body does things to actually help you deal with that situation. Maybe you need to fight, maybe you need to run. So it actually, the adrenaline, another name for that is epinephrine. You probably heard of that. Is by increasing the heart rate. The heart rate goes up so it can pump more blood to the body. It increases the force of the contraction of the heart. It actually facilitates blood flow to the muscles and to the brain, so you can think, you can fight, you can run. It also helps with the conversion of glycogen in the liver to the glucose, so that you have more immediate energy food to help your body in whatever it needs to do to process this stressful situation. So all of that comes from those adrenal glands on top of the kidneys. I want you to know some things about the small intestine. We have up here, it's not in the picture, but you have your mouth and then the esophagus when you swallow. That's the tube that goes from your mouth to your stomach. And then from the stomach, the food goes in down here into all the small intestine. It looks like it's going here, but it's not. This is the last thing the food goes through. Here, up and down and out the rectum. So it goes from the stomach into the small intestine, and here you can see they have the three names of they actually name parts of the small intestine because it's so long. It's about 18 feet long. So the first part is called the duodenum. The second part is called the jejunum. The last part before it goes into the large intestine is called the ileum. I kind of remember it, but I think of don't jump in. Don't jump in. So I know the first part is the D word, the duodenum. But what we're interested in here too is how the food is broken down and then absorbed into the body to be used. So up here in the mouth, you chew things up and you break into smaller and smaller pieces, and it goes down in the stomach, and there's a lot of churning and stuff in there that's breaking the food down even further. So there's the churning mechanical breakdown there, and then the food passes into the small intestine. Now what's kind of interesting here is that a lot of enzymes come into that small intestine to actually break that food down so small that it can then be absorbed through the intestinal wall into the blood vessels or the capillaries, such that it can actually get into the circulatory system, and that food can be taken, or the very, very small particles of the food now, but all the nutrients can now be taken to all the different parts of the body. So stomach, and then small intestine, and then whatever is left, see, from all this, and then goes into the large intestine. That's the last bit of traveling that needs to take place until it's then discharged from the body. So I want you to know that we have the excretory system, which we call generally the excretory system, we call the urinary system. Now on the test, they're going to put all excretion systems into one. So they're going to put the urinary tract in with the digestive, in with the respiratory, because they're taking it as being, how does the body rid itself of whatever it is, whether it be a gas, which would be like the carbon dioxide that we breathe out. It could be through the digestive system. Remember, anything that the body hasn't absorbed and mixes with bacteria and then comes out as fecal material. It could be the urine, because remember, the blood is filtered through the kidneys, and then through the kidneys, then they will pick out what the body should retain. They get rid of the things that the body doesn't need, and they also regulate the amount of fluid that the body either can get rid of or needs to retain, and thus not get rid of. So, be familiar with all that. We've already talked about some of this already with the kidneys and the ureters and the bladder, and then there's those little adrenal glands on top of the kidneys. Arm and leg bones, we want you to know. There's three in the arm and three in the leg. The big bone in the arm here is the humerus, from the shoulder down to the elbow here. And then if you turn your arm upright, you have the two bones that are in the lower arm, and the one that's on the side of the little finger is the ulna. The one that's on the side of the thumb is the radius. And then we also want you to know the leg bones. The big thigh bone there is the femur. There's the patella. You don't necessarily have to know that. That's that kneecap. And then you have the tibia and the fibula. So make sure that you're familiar with those. Now, they want you to know a little bit about the egg and the sperm. This picture here is a reproduction, it looks like here. But this is a real one here. So this one looks very much like this. Now, you can see here's the egg. And usually the egg is when it's fertilized, is oftentimes nearing the end of the fallopian tube or just at the beginning of the uterus. So you have that egg coming down, and all those sperm are swimming around, swimming toward the egg. Now, what's interesting is that I like this picture shows that once one sperm penetrates and that genetic material goes in, no other sperm, everything else shuts down. It's like all the doors close. No other sperm can get in. That's pretty miraculous in itself. Now, they want you to know the parts for the test, the parts of the sperm here, and you have that whip-like tail that allows it to propel itself up to where the egg is. Now, obviously, there's got to be something that supplies the sperm with energy to move. And remember what the mitochondria is, like the energy warehouse in a cell, and here too, the mitochondrion here is what actually supplies the energy to move for that sperm. So there's the head, the mitochondrion there, and then the tail. And here's a good picture of what it looks like. Just an amazing process. Okay, some of the things that you need to know about the ear. I like this picture, but I like this one too because it shows some things that you can't see as well here, like what part is the outer ear, what part's the middle ear, and what part is the inner ear here. They're here, the parts are here, but they don't actually divide it. Another name for that outside flap, our outer ear, is the auricle. So you'll want to know the auricle. You'll want to know the ear canal. That's the part that sometimes we can put not very far up in, because you could actually break the eardrum here. You can clean with a Q-tip in the ear canal there. The eardrum here, another name for that, is the tympanic membrane. So all of those are considered part of the outer ear. And in the middle ear, we have, the three bones that are here, the stapes, the incus, and malleus, which I think you had in your lesson. And here's that nerve, so you have sound waves coming in, causing vibrations, going through all this process here, and then finally all that information reaches the auditory nerve that can then send it to the brain so that we can change all this process into something that has meaning to us in our brain. So the whole thing is quite an amazing process here. This is kind of interesting here too. I don't know if they they do here show the eustachian tube. This is an airway, actually linked to the throat. You can see it comes right up into the ear. That's why a lot of times if you get infection in your throat, you can get an ear infection too very easily, because this is an airway here linked to the throat that actually comes up right into the ear, the eustachian tube. Okay, the brain, we want you to know what parts of the different parts of the brain, let's see, I didn't say that right, what function different parts of the brain have. And there are two main parts of the brain, the cerebrum and the cerebellum. All this here, up here, even though it's broken then down into further parts, as you can see here, the frontal part, temporal, occipital, all this is the cerebrum. This part down here is what we call the cerebellum, and I put a little bit of information over here. Now both of these, you're going to see this is this side. Remember, there's two hemispheres, so on the other side of the brain you're going to have the same thing. The frontal lobe, you're going to have a parietal portion. You'll have the occipital lobe and another temporal lobe. So this, we're only looking at one side here, but know that this is just one hemisphere. There's another hemisphere on the other half of you. So this part down here in the cerebellum is pretty important because it's associated a lot with movement, posture, and being able to maintain your balance. There are some people that can get different neurological diseases that it starts to affect this cerebellum back here, and so it affects their balance because it's affecting this part of the brain back here. Now go through and see what part the frontal lobe, and it's very brief. You can go into much more detail here. What things like which one is it here? The temporal lobe is with speech. People that have a stroke in this particular area of the brain, the speech can be affected. The parietal lobe up here. So just be familiar with some of the very basic things that are involved with each of the parts here of the cerebrum. And though the other, what they call the little brain here, the cerebellum, and how that has a lot to do with the coordination of your movement, postures, maintain your posture and your balance. The eye here, amazing that this little teeny part, it seems so simple, but when you really look at it, pretty miraculous how all the parts have to work together. If you had any part that wasn't there, then the rest of the eye doesn't work. So here's what the eye is. Here's the white part of the eye that we see, the sclera is what we call it right here. That's that muscle. It's a muscular part here that kind of controls the shape of the lens. There's that hole. This black thing is really a hole here that allows the light in, and then you have the lens behind it. Miraculous pieces of information have parts here, and then after the light comes in and goes through the lens, then we have all these cells, light sensitive cells here on the retina back here that actually have to change the light energy that's coming in through that pupil. Remember, that's a hole in through that, through the lens, changes that light energy into electrical signals that then need to go through the optic nerve to the brain and kind of transcribe there so that we can understand what we're seeing. So pretty amazing. So know, those kind of parts of the eye, the sclera, what it does, that's that muscular part here. And it's also the part when you look straight on that we see the white part. Then we have the nose. Kind of interesting here, why do you smell, what enables you to smell, how that sensation of smell. So you breathe in, well, there's these specific nerves that are here, and they all lead up to, these nerves sense that smell that you're smelling and lead up here to the olfactory bulb. What I'd like to have you look up is, what's the primary nerve involved right here, involved in the transmission of the sensation of smell? And this kind of tells you here that this is the olfactory bulb. What do you think, what nerve is this one? But you'll want to know it for your test too. So that's an amazing thing there. The human body, when you get down, and the thing is, we're not even at the cellular level here. We're kind of, we're looking at whole nerves, but we could even go much, much smaller and find tons of much more miraculous information as to how the body is put together. Let's see, we want to go to hormones. what are the chemicals called that regulate body function? You know, I have a picture here. There's tons of hormones that are produced in one part of the body, and then they go somewhere else and have a function. So when they say what are the chemicals called that regulate all these body functions, they are hormones. That's kind of a giveaway there. So I want you to know, kind of look through this, be familiar with a little bit of that. What gland regulates the body's metabolism? What glands affect the metabolism of calcium? You should know some of these, but some specifics too, because they're going to have some specifics on your test. Immunity here. If you have a type of immunity, it means that for pathogens that could come into the body, whether it be bacteria or parasites or fungal infections, there's just a multitude of different things that can enter the bacteria, I think I said, can enter the body. And there's different ways of getting some type of immunity to the thing that is coming in and trying to harm you. So there's acquired immunity, and this breaks down, this is the general term, immunity, and then there's naturally acquired, artificially acquired. When I think of natural, I think of something, if I didn't go any further, if I'm just kind of hypothesizing what I think naturally acquired might be, it sounds to me like it's not something that maybe a person's going to inject into me to cause to have something happen. It's just something that happens naturally with the body. And certainly that is what it is. If you have a pathogen that enters the body, bacteria is a perfect example. The body then produces antibodies, and then there's specialized lymphocytes to fight the bacteria. So the antigens come in naturally, the body naturally, that's a natural function, produces those antibodies. So we call that it's naturally acquired, active. Now I have antibodies that are naturally acquired, but active. I had to, the pathogen came in and my body actually produced those antibodies. Now what if it's passive? That sounds like some kind of the opposite of active. And it is. Naturally acquiring would be that the mom has produced the antibodies, and they're passed from the mother then to the baby via the placenta, or it can even go from the mom to the baby through the breast milk. That's why breastfeeding is so important if the mom is able to do that, because so many antibodies that the mom already has are passed to the baby, so that if a bacterial infection or a fungal infection or any type of parasite infection comes, the baby will already, at birth have some of the antibodies necessary to fight that infection. Now on this side, artificially acquired, artificially sounds, it's not something natural. It might be something that maybe somebody makes and injects into me or something like that. So let's take a peek. Active. Antigens, which remember are the disease causing things, whether it can, when you get an immunization, little particles of the actual pathogen can be put into you so that your body can develop the antibodies against it, such that if that pathogen then attacks you, in full force with multiple bacteria or multiple fungi or multiple parasites, your body already has the antibodies to fight it. That's what immunizations are. So antigens are introduced into the body in the form of vaccinations. When that happens, the body then produces antibodies, and now we've got those antibodies already in our body, or something that can be formed if that particular pathogen enters our body. So we're ready to fight them right away. We don't have to take the time to start going through the entire process of saying, ooh, I have a pathogen that's entered my body. The body has to say, ooh, there's a pathogen. What kind is it? I've got to go through the whole immune response to develop those antibodies. The body is ready to go if that pathogen ever comes in after. So that's active. Passive would be if, it's artificial again, as this is, because a vaccination or immunization is artificially acquired. Passive would be if antibodies can be preformed and actually put into somebody else's body, where they can then fight the pathogen that is attacking that particular person's body. So we want to know again that we have all kinds of immunity. Some are naturally acquired, some are artificially acquired, and then the naturally is broken down into the active, where our body is active in producing the antibodies if a pathogen comes in. Passive would be what? The mom has already produced the antibodies, and those antibodies are then passed from the mother to the baby, either through the breast milk or even through the placenta before the baby is born. Artificially acquired would be when all the vaccinations that we get, where those antigens are introduced into the body through a vaccine. The body sees it, produces the antibodies, and now if that disease process ever attacks us full force, we are ready to go. And then the passive artificially acquired would be if somebody has a disease process going on and we just inject through a syringe preformed antibodies in a serum that can then fight off the pathogen that's attacking that body. So be familiar with those. Nervous system, we want you to know the function of these types of the nervous system. And what I'm talking about on that is, we have our body's nervous system. There's central nervous system, parasympathetic, somatic, sympathetic. Some parts of the whole nervous system are automatic. Some are purposeful, where we actually decide to do it, and maybe, we move an extremity. It could be part of this. One of these words has to do with all the nerves that are toward the arms. It's not the trunk of the body; it's the arms, legs, feet. Then you have another part that deals with just the brain and the spinal cord. So they've kind of broken the nervous system down into particular what would you say? Kind of parts, function by function. And so we want you to be familiar with all of these. So just get some brief information from your notes, and then make sure that you're familiar with those. Skeletons, they're going to be asking what type of skeletons do these organisms have, and the skeletons could be anywhere from it can be a skeleton that's more hydrostatic, dealing with water or fluid. It can be a skeleton that's inside the body. Could be a skeleton on the outside of the body. So make sure that you're familiar with that. And then one thing specifically that I did notice on the test is that they want you to know the type of muscles that insects have attached to their exo. What does that sound like? Exo. What would be the difference between exo and endoskeleton? Endo sounds like in. This would be an endoskeleton. Exoskeleton sounds like something, if it's not in, it must be on the outside. So that should be all of these. Okay. So make sure you're familiar with all those skeletons. They may give you some organisms and ask, does this particular organism have an endoskeleton or an exoskeleton, or is it a fluid skeleton or hydrostatic pressure? We want to go over mechanoreceptors. These are kind of interesting. In the skin, there are different sensory nerves that can detect things like pressure, heavy pressure, vibration. That would be a good one to be in the ear. Light, like light touch. Even if the skin stretches. All of those are called, down here, they have specific names that you don't need to know all those specifically, but know that they are sensory neurons, and all of those are mechanoreceptors because they're dealing with it's a physical thing from an outside force, such as touch, pressure. So let's see if there's anything else we would need to know here. All those are sensory neurons. We talked about that. Kind of interesting, is fun to try, is that the compass that maybe you use in geometry has a pencil on one end, and then that like a pointed thing on the other, kind of hold it on the paper. It's kind of interesting to test to see, like on your fingertips compared to the back of your hand, compared to your back, maybe your stomach, because these touch receptors, like these 4 that are listed down here, are really not evenly distributed over the body. So the fingertips and the tongue may have as many as 100 per little cubic centimeter, which means a little square a centimeter long on each side. The back of the hand has fewer than 10. So what's kind of fun is to take one of those, like a compass, and separate it out, so you have the 2 tips. Put it on different areas of your body and see if you can feel them as 2 points or you feel them as 1 point. Probably on your fingertips you're going to actually feel, I actually did it too, and I can feel the 2 points on my fingertips. And I did it on the back of my hand, and that actually, in different places, I could only feel 1. So I didn't have any pressure or sensory neurons or the mechanical receptors in this. For the 2 points I had on the back of my hand, there weren't any underneath one of the points, so I could only feel 1 point. So try that. That's kind of a fun thing to do for to try to determine a little bit of information about those mechanoreceptors. Okay, protostomes versus deuterostomes. This is kind of interesting because all it is that when the egg reaches a sperm and you have the new organism being developed. This really should be for the protostomes here. I noticed that I got after I put this slide on here. This is correct with a spiral cleavage. This one here should be radial cleavage, which means that you can tell but where the cells are as you have one, then the one develops into divides into 2, and then from the 2 you get 4, and then from the 4 you get each one dividing, you get 8. There are different ways to actually get that 8-cell stage. If you look at here, see the 4 original cells are not quite like these. So which is kind of interesting that there's more than one type of process for cell division. Now, when you're talking about the protostomes, the only thing I really need to have all it shows is that when you're determining the difference between the protostomes and the deuterostomes, you only have to really remember 3 things. The patterns of the cleavage are different, okay? And the protostomes, remember, is the spiral, but this one here should be radial. How the coelom, which is kind of the body cavity inside, like we have body cavity inside us in our trunk, is formed, and which part of the digestive system develops first. Believe it or not, like for protostomes, those include things like arthropods, all the bugs, worms, mollusks would be things like clams, octopus. Echinoderms would be things like starfish. All the chordates are things that have a backbone. But you notice that these, then, the echinoderms and chordates, the initial cells will multiply and divide this way. So I would cross this out and make this radial for the deuterostomes. And this one over here is a spiral. So, and then you kind of take a look here, they look a little bit different. And so then what's kind of interesting too is that when you see this word indeterminate and determinate, if you're talking about the deuterostomes there, when it reaches that 8-cell stage, if you were to take each of those 8 cells apart, if they were separated, each one of those could actually still go on and become a complete organism. So that's us. Now over here for these groups of animals here, they go through the spiral and it's determinate. So it's already determined that each of the 8 cells there in that stage, if you were to separate them, each one cannot grow into an individual organism. The fate of all the cells has already been determined, which is kind of interesting. Now another thing that's different too, they want you to know, you have all the cells are reproducing. Finally, you're going to have, obviously, as you're reproducing, you're going to have to end up with something like a mouth and then something like an anus in most organisms. So the first little opening that you get here for the protostomes, okay, you have the gut that's formed here. The very first little opening they call the blastopore for the protostomes here. It's also called the blastopore in the other one. But what's going to develop from that first little openings, the blastopore in the protostomes, is the mouth. Now what's going to develop over here for the first little blastopore, the first little opening that has to do with the primitive gut, is not going to be the mouth as it is in the protostome. It's going to be the what? The oral end, the mouth. For the deuterostome. So, excuse me, the blastopore, will actually become the anus. So this one here is with its mouth, and this one's the anus. So the second little hole that opens up will be the mouth, and the second hole on this one will be the anus. So I think it's kind of interesting that, different groups of animals, which chordates is where we are, when you have the 8-cell stage, it's different in how it divides. Remember that the 8 cells that are there in this group, And these groups here are indeterminate, which means if you separate them, each one could develop into an organism. Over here, each of those 8 cells, fate's already determined. They can't. If you separate them out, they cannot each grow into a separate organism. And then as all the the cells keep reproducing, you get that primitive gut in there, primitive gut here. The first opening here, remember that first little opening is called a blastopore, kind of like a pore in your skin. It's opening there. That the oral end is going to develop first in the protostomes, like the mouth, and yet on this side the mouth is second, and it's the anus that actually develops first from that initial blastopore. So that's why they have, you could see some real differences there in the different groups of animals. That's why they call them protostomes versus deuterostomes. There are some really different, some very different ways that the processes of life forming there are very different there. So I think that's very interesting. Remember, the coelom then is the body cavities inside. Like our body cavity would be where all our intestines are in a body cavity, and then we have the heart, and nothing's attached. The heart's not attached to the ribs, or the ribs aren't attached to the intestines. They're all within a body cavity. Symmetry here, we want you to know 3 main ones. We have radial, bilateral. Bi means 2. Asymmetrical, A usually means not. So this must be no symmetry noted. A, no symmetry. And that's true. There's no, you can't cut it any particular way and have the 2 parts be the same. This one, I could cut it multiple ways. I could cut it down here, I could cut it here, I could cut it here. That's called radial symmetry. And bilateral means there's one line that I can designate in an organism that when I cut it down, I have the 2 equal halves on both sides. Well, here's a fly, so there's another example of bilateral. There's a jellyfish, that's a sea anemone there, same thing. None there, so that's asymmetrical. Starfish, what kind is that? Radial. Okay, so and then what I want to finish up with, I want you to just go through these. I want you to look through your lessons. These are some other things that you're going to be seeing on the test. What taste can be detected by humans, but in very, very, very small amounts? I can still taste it. It's amazing. What would you think it would be? Do you think it would be sweet? Do you think it would be bitter? Now, do you see asexual reproduction taking place more in plants or animals? Probably without looking. I bet you'd be able to probably give a pretty good guess on that, but make sure that you're correct then by looking in your lessons. What type of fertilization do birds and reptiles have? And do they lay eggs outside of the body? Do both of them? Remember we talked about the mechanoreceptors? What are chemoreceptors used for in humans? What are they used for in animals? Is there an invertebrate? An invertebrate means, remember, there's no spinal cord. Are there invertebrates that can hear? Like a worm? Can a worm hear? Are there any? Animal body plans, including there's the coelomates. And we talked about that a little bit already. I want you to go back to your lesson. I looked in your lesson. You have a nice write-up there on the animal body plans, whether it be coelomates or acoelomates or pseudocoelomates. There are the 3. Look at the pictures, but look through your entire lesson. Just don't, look at one little part. Look through the entire lesson, then compare what the reading is there with the pictures that are there. If you have any problems, I want you to let me know, and we'll talk about it in a class live. Now, mollusks like snails and clams, they have a simple heart that pumps what? Does it pump blood? Does it pump something else? Through open-ended vessels. What are collar cells in sponges? What do? How do they work? Are there any enzymes involved in sponges? Sponges are one of those things that are, remember, the asymmetrical. What are the microscopic subunits in the kidney called? Filter blood. What do spiders and insects use to get rid of waste? And that same thing is used to maintain osmotic balance. I mean, we have kidneys. Humans have kidneys. Remember we were talking about that? Kidneys filter the blood and keep the molecules that are good and get rid of the ones that are not. Also very important in maintaining balance. Water balance was involving sodium. Invertebrates only have non-specific immunity. What does that mean? Non-specific. Go back to your slide that we looked at and look in your lesson. And then list some specialized cells in the human body. Can you think of one right off the top of your head? What's a very specialized cell? The first one that comes to my mind would be a red blood cell. Carries oxygen, very specialized. So this is a good study guide for your Unit 4 exam. If you have any questions once you've gone through, or once you've answered these questions here, if you want to kind of connect with me and give me you can even write them down. I'll give you a little feedback on them, make sure that you have them correct. And then I hope this helps on your test. So thank you for watching. Give me a call and let me know that you've watched, and then good luck on your test. Bye-bye.